Hey, Amanda. Thank you so much for being here and welcome to the Women's World podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. We were chatting beforehand. I'm like, I just love what you're all about. So I'm excited to have a conversation with you today.
Yeah, me too. So I want to dive deep into a couple of conversations with you, or topics, I should say. One of those being there's a strategy that you call vertically stacking in order to achieve more wealth. So I definitely want to dive into that with you. But first, can you just share with us, Amanda, a bit about your journey so far? Because your career has spent 15 years now, and that involves three businesses. That's incredible. So, first of all, hats off to you. That is phenomenal. And you were just mentioning then something that you feel incredibly lucky about is that you run businesses that really are through your creative expression and the stuff that you enjoy doing, and you've been able to commercialize that in a really beautiful way. So, can you just share with us a bit about your journey leading into being a designer and then an entrepreneur? And if there were any kind of pivotal moments for you that shaped that?
I always laugh because I think I wrote a book a couple of years ago and it's a satirical memoir about my life. And one of the feedback that I got from people was like how much they saw of themselves in the story. And, it started this conversation of like what a gift it would be if everyone had a memoir that you could read about them, right? Because I think when people talk about their origin stories, not only is it insightful, but I think you see little moments of yourself. And I think that's how we get encouraged is like when we see little moments of ourselves in stories. And so I always do like to share my origin story because I think it's interesting. And I also think, people might make assumptions about, oh, well, you always wanted to be an entrepreneur or you come from a family of entrepreneurs, but like that's just simply not the case. So I have, I guess, like a bit of an unusual sort of, childhood. I was born to quite a young mom. She was 17 when she got pregnant, had me at 18. And because of that, ultimately, I was raised by my mom and her parents, so my grandparents, and then her three younger siblings. So there were seven of us living in a bungalow with one washroom, if you can believe it or not. So I think people think, oh, you're an interior designer. Like you must have just grown up in this like house and that's how you had the passion. I'm like, oh no. There was like drywall being put up in hallways to create bedrooms. It was like rapping on the door to get into the bathroom. But, if I look back, I definitely had a passion for like repainting and designing my room and things like that. But, again, I've been in my career for 20 years. Interior design wasn't really popular. I didn't know about it when I graduated. So ultimately I was a fairly strong student. I was really involved in extracurricular activities in junior high and high school, and then when I graduated I went into general arts, but then went to being not a great student and ultimately had this moment of being like, I need to specialize in something. And so I actually just kind of sat down one day and was doing research, and interior design popped up. I don't even know that I ever thought it was going to be a career for me. I mean, if you can believe it or not, like being a lawyer was on the list. Like I can't imagine two more opposite things. And I also was really interested in television. So I'm a creative person. I grew up doing a lot of music and a lot of visual arts and things like that. So acting and singing and drawing and all of those fun things. And so I had a bit of this sort of epiphany moment of being like, oh, here's something that could be an interesting career. Because I was also concerned about going into some of these industries and really struggling. Like we hear about the struggling artist, right? And I was ambitious and really wanted to make a life for myself. And so decided to move from Edmonton in 2002 to Calgary, and never looked back. Took the interior design program here in Calgary. The reason why I did move is because they have a degree program. And then I graduated in 2005. Calgary was booming. The market was booming. Oil and gas was booming. It just made sense. So I actually worked for a company for just over 3 years. And what happened was I was working full time for them. And when I say full time, it wasn't a 40-hour week, it was like a 60-hour week. I was working at a restaurant, Girls Tim Palace, and I was working like 3 nights a week bartending because that's how you afford your nice condo living on your own when you're in your 20s, right? And then I started getting some work on the side. So I was designing like 5,000 square foot restaurants in the evenings when I wasn't working. So like the hustle was like the hustle was real at that point, and that was pre hustle being even a word. So yeah, in 2009, in the middle of the recession, I left a cushy job where I was not at risk of losing my job. It was great. I started my business, and I started it with like no savings, no business experience, like nothing, like no, like I had one client, and it was actually my client who pushed me. He was just like, why don't you start your own business? And so, I actually have a lot to thank to him in terms of like pushing that, because like I kind of think I'm an accidental entrepreneur. I didn't grow up in an entrepreneurial family, as I mentioned, and it was just sort of something that I fell into, and now I can't imagine my life looking any different. That's kind of like where I got to with the business. And then, again, we're 17 years in business now, so like there's lots of failures, there's lots of wins, there's been lots of challenges, lots of things to celebrate. It's been a wild ride for sure.
I do love hearing, as you say, that origin story, because I think it can be so easy to see where someone is now without understanding what it took to get to that point. And that's usually what we see. We see the present, we see the now, but we don't see all the hurdles and the hardship and the shit that you've gone through over that 17-year period.
Totally. And I think there's this idea, like, I think that especially in an age of so much social media, in terms of like people deciding what they're going to portray, I do think that being an entrepreneur is glamorized. And I don't know that like the dark side or the lonely side or the challenging side is always shared. And it's really easy to get excited by that shiny thing and be like, oh, for the first 2 or 3 years. But it's like, do you have the staying power to continue doing this thing through really hard times? And those are the moments when you really start to question, should I be here? And I think everybody goes, oh, once you've made it for 5 years, you've got it. No, you have to constantly be paying attention. Like, that's a big lesson I learned. You can never lose sight of your business. And because we're also talking about wealth, you can also never lose sight of the numbers. That's so important to pay attention to that in the process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I want to dive into that with you. I think you said that in such a beautiful way, that staying power. It's so important, and especially in a world where we have instant gratification, and social media amplifies that need for people,
Totally.
but it's not the reality. There's this period, I always call it invisible results. It's like there are results taking place while you're doing the work and you're in the grind and you're in the trenches. You just can't see them yet. And so there's a lot of faith in the process, but it's just like that staying power. And I think faith helps, if you have faith in that process of where you're going and what you're creating and what matters, that helps you build that stick power that you're talking about.
And I know it's like a cliche saying, but it's kind of like, money follows passion. I think if you're going out and you're doing something that you really love, there is, as you said, this quiet thing that's happening in the background. And I know for my industry specifically, and there's lots that are like mine, we have a really long sales cycle. Like, it is not uncommon for somebody to say, hey, I heard you speak at a conference 7 years ago. And then all of a sudden they're doing their house and they're like, I've been following you for years on Instagram. I've always wanted to work. I always thought if I was going to get my forever home, I would work with you. Like, and these things are happening and I have absolutely no idea. So you have to have that staying power to go, like, sometimes, the ROI isn't that you sign a client the next day or the next month or the next 5 years for that matter. There's this like lag. And so you constantly have to be showing up because you just don't know what's kind of quietly, as you said. I love that, like what's happening in the background.
Yeah, and it is. It's just, it's nearly like whether maybe there is a law around this. You know how there's like different laws, like law of
Yeah, law of
polarity.
attraction.
This.
Yeah.
I'm like, what is the law with this? Because it is real. I think if you ask anyone who has created something from scratch and started their business, is that there is a law around the lag time that it takes. The seed that you plant today is not just going to be sprouted in an hour. It's like, what do we need to do to nurture it? Nurture it. You see nothing. And then eventually it's like, there it is.
And right, it takes time to build something that has integrity, that people can trust, where you can build a portfolio of work or reviews or whatever your business is in. Like, you can't do that stuff overnight. Like, you can't pay to be ranked number one by Google. Sure, you can pay for SEO and ads and things like that, but to get organic ranking on Google, that is a time play. Like, you can't, there's strategy, but you can't just overnight be like, oh, I'm just going to rank number one on Google. It just doesn't work that way.
Yeah, absolutely. So important to know that. I'm curious to know because you're creative, right? And I think you realize that from a really young age, especially you just sharing all the things that you were doing, like as a singer and acting and like doing all these different things. And we often get told, as you said, the struggling artist. I think even as children, right, you get told that won't make you money. Pick something else, be realistic. And so we kind of get the creativity beaten out of us. But we also know that that's the magic. That's actually the stuff that if we work out how to develop it and nurture it and bring it into the world, we're going to create some really cool shit with that. And I think a lot of women in our program, they struggle with that because I can see a lot of women who are creative, but there's this disconnect
Mhm.
in truly believing in that creativity and then filling the gap to commercializing it. Like, was there a moment that you had where you're like, wow, I can commercialize my creativity, I can do this? Talk to me about that. And then what was some of the first realizations and steps that you took?
Yeah, I actually get really fired up on this topic. In fact, I eventually want to do my PhD, and I actually want to do my thesis on the intersection between the creative and the arts and business and wealth, because I think that there is this big knowledge gap for sure. First and foremost, unpopular opinion, I think everyone's creative. As soon as somebody says they're not creative, I'm like, bullshit. I don't care if you're working on Excel spreadsheets or you are a ceramicist, you are creative. You're creative in your own field. A doctor can be creative in terms of the type of technologies they want to employ or the way that they want to work with a client. Like, it doesn't matter what you do, creativity flows through all of us. But you're right, there's this narrative that you can't make money as an artist, and I think it's that narrative specifically that holds us back, because the reality is we see it all over the place. There are lots of creative people making lots of money. I mean, there are artists all over the world. So I actually think that it is a bit of the individual needs to take accountability and not play into this whole, like, I think this happens in music as an example. If you go mainstream, you're a sellout. In my mind, my counter argument to that is, if you don't go mainstream, who's listening to your music? And what impact are you making on the world if you don't commercialize your work, right? So, there's a bit of this, I think people hold on to a bit of the ego of being like, well, if it's that good, people will find me. It's like, no, maybe that happens for the 1%, but like, you actually have to advocate for your work. And I think you have to hold value in it. And it is unfortunately still the creative arts that are the first things for people to be like, I can't believe you're so expensive, or can you just do this for me for free or whatever, right? So I do think it takes artists embracing to be like, yes, and yes, I can be creative and I can be paid what I'm worth. And so I do think it comes down to artistic people advocating for themselves, because otherwise we're just undercutting ourselves. And I know lots of friends that are in the arts and doing well. I also know lots of friends that are in the arts and that struggle. But I do think there's a world in which it can happen. And I don't know if there was a moment for me. I think there was a series of conversations that happened over time with people, or little bits of insight where you start to realize, like, no, like, I bring value to the world. So that's why I feel like it's so individual. Like, as soon as you recognize and realize that you bring value to the world, it's really easy to advocate for it and just simply honestly say no to people who don't value it. You think I'm too expensive? Great. I'm not the right fit for you. Best of luck working with somebody else and finding somebody else that fits that mold, right?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
much great advice in that. I'd be really interested to understand your mindset when you were in this process. But when you started, you're like, balls to the wall, let's just go. You gotta do it. That's the time. So talk me through the starting process, because I feel like that can often be the hardest part, right? Because I know why, once I get started with something, once I'm in the race and I'm running, things are so much easier. Like, I'm learning what I need to learn. I'm getting feedback. I'm learning just so many things that are going to help me. But when you stay stuck in not even getting going with something, I find that's when all the doubt keeps piling on, all of
Yeah.
the excuses, all of the weight, and it gets heavier and heavier and heavier and heavier. And the longer you take, the harder it gets just to start. So for the woman who is in that phase of, I want to bring something to the world, I need to start, even if it is the side hustle, which is where you started. Can you
Mm.
just talk to your mindset with that and the things that really helped you? What did you lean into to make sure that you didn't stop? You didn't keep putting the brakes on.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. That's such a big question. So, like, first and foremost, I think going through the motions of just doing things and being comfortable with discomfort, like, that's the first thing, right? Because I didn't know what I was doing. And, if you go back to that, like, what would you teach your former self? Sure, there are some things. But if we could all teach our former selves things, I don't know that we would have a community of strong, independent, tenacious, brilliant women if we just knew all the answers to begin with. Like, I think part of going out and taking these risks is being open to the fact that it is a risk and that failure is probably inevitable at some point. Like, something I've got instances where I look back and I go, that wasn't my best moment. You know what? I don't regret any of them, because the lessons that I learned in those moments are so crucial to my success that I would never take them away. I would never. So I think the realization is that it doesn't matter if you've been in it for 2 minutes or 20 years like I have been. I still have some doubt. Doubt is healthy, but reframe the doubt. Like, instead of going in, I mean, this is the biggest difference, we hear all the time about men. Men just go in confidently and they're like, I've got all the answers. And women tend to go in a little with, a little bit more of a sort of a humble approach. I think there's nothing wrong with that. I think maintaining a certain level of sort of, doubt, or whatever you want to call it, modesty, or whatever it is, of being like, I don't have the answers, but I'm going to work hard to get them. I'm going to go the extra mile. So I really think anyone who's doubting themselves, like, I just don't have the mindset that that's just going to go away. Like, I still doubt myself on a daily basis. And we call it, imposter syndrome, or whatever we want to call it. But, I think as we move through these motions, we start to become more confident. And frankly, we start to care less about what other people think. And we become more inclined to focus on what it is that's bringing us joy and what's bringing us happiness. And, like, there are far too many people in jobs that they hate, and they spend their entire life doing it and they don't do anything about it. And that's a shame. That's the piece that I'm like, if you're passionate about something, like, just go out and give it a try. Like, literally, what is worst case scenario? So what? You'll start over. You'll do something different.
Mm.
It's all valuable life experience to me.
Yeah, such beautiful advice. Even, I think with that doubt, and you're so right, it doesn't go away. And maybe sometimes we put people on pedestals and we think, oh, they just don't experience what I am. And because I'm experiencing all of these doubts and fears, maybe it's not for me. Instead of going, no, that means you got to lean in.
Yeah.
That's a sign that, yeah, you're just going past the comfort, you're going past what you currently know. And I always remind myself, like, where I'm going, of course, I don't yet know what it's going to look like, what it's going to take, what it's going to feel like, because I haven't got there yet.
Yeah, I went to a women's event. It was probably over a decade ago now, to be honest. And I remember, and I don't usually like those types of events if it's too rah-rah. That's not my vibe. But I did enjoy this one, and they asked everybody to close their eyes, and then they asked anyone who had doubt or these feelings of imposter syndrome, whatever, to raise their hand. And of course, I had to peek, and I'm sure other people peeked. Every single person in that room felt that way. And so I think one of the most recent lessons that I have learned, and this is through some like studies of stoicism, I'm really into Ryan Holiday's work and things like that, is, I hate to say it, but we're raised to believe that we're all so unique, right? Like, you are so unique, you are so special, you are going to go and do things. And I'm not taking that away. But I don't know if we're as special as we're made out to be. The reality is actually, I think we have more similarities with people around us than we care to admit. And I think when you can step back and be like, I'm not the only one, like, I'm sorry, you're not that special. You're not the only one who's ever started a business. You're not the only one that's ever started a business and is also a mom, or a single mom, or has, a parent that needs support. Like, the reality is there is an entire planet of people that have past experiences that you can lean on. And I think that's the biggest lesson that I've learned recently, is it's like, you're not that special. Get over yourself and find somebody who can experience share with you, right?
Yes. Oh, I'm so glad you said that. And it doesn't take away from the value. We're not saying each of us aren't valuable and we have unique value, but the experience that like the human experience, no, we all have that. It's such a beautiful way. I think of, those like yourself and people who have acquired and attained a certain level of success. What I see in them that is unique is what I call their response system. It's like, no, you still have the doubt, you still feel the fear, you still, take on criticism, judgment, you still have to go through failures to get to the end result of
You
success.
get
Like,
to
that
choose how
doesn't
you
change.
respond to those things.
Yeah, you respond differently. And people who I see, who I chat with, who have just, they have attained that level. They just have a different response system. And it's like, well, I knew this was coming.
And that's learned too. Because, when I look back and I think about one of my weaknesses, like most people when they're starting out, is we're not taught how to deal with conflict. So we're like, ooh. And I think those things are especially true culturally, depending on your upbringing and those types of things. And so I would shy away from it. But the more you practice these things, the easier they become. And that's the same thing with your response system. I also used to be very reactive. I used to thrive more in chaos. And now it's like, I think through my meditation practice and things like that, I've learned some lessons. And again, I'm by no means perfect, but I'm definitely better than how I used to be. And I agree with you 100%. It's like our ability to be reflective and kind of assess the situation and then make a decision on something and how we decide we're going to show up. It's all mindset, really. And that comes with practice for sure.
Yeah, such beautiful advice. Let's talk about vertically stacking. I am excited to just to learn about this from you, because it's something that it's a strategy that you lean into, that you've clearly done yourself in order to achieve more wealth. What is it? For those who have never heard of vertically stacking, what is this strategy?
Yeah, I mean, like, and I encourage. I'm by no means an expert in this area. I've definitely implemented it in my own business, but there's lots of books on this, and I can definitely give some examples. But you're right; it is strategy, and really, it's kind of where a company expands operations, like upstream and downstream, which I'll chat a little bit more. But that's within your sort of industry or value chain that you're working in. And one of my favorite quotes is actually by Jim Rohn. He said, "We don't get paid for time, we get paid for value, and the market deems what is valuable." And I think that is such great business advice, because it's like we might think we have like, this idea is cat's pajamas. Why isn't anyone buying it? Because the market doesn't want it. Either you haven't marketed it properly, or people just frankly don't give a shit about your product, right? Like that's where I think removing the ego and being like open to the experience. Like, do I have to pivot? Do I have to change this? Do people want it? So ultimately, when we talk about vertical integration, like, we're trying to kind of increase our control, the efficiency, and just like the value that we're giving to our customers. And so there's kind of two things. There's like vertical integration, there's backwards integration, forward. Like there's all these different terms, but ultimately I like to just call it stacking. So, as an example, as an interior design company, when I think about different ways that I can control my supply chains, one of the things that we did recently is I started a construction company in 2019. So all you're really doing is you are finding a gap in the market. You are seeing a problem. You're trying to solve a problem. You're looking for the sticky things. What's sticky in your business? What is a client repeatedly complaining about? Or where are you repeatedly losing money? And those to me are the opportunities. And so when I think about vertical integration, I think about, okay, here's the example. I was so tired of dealing with crappy contractors that I was like, I can just do this better. And so now about 30 to 40% of our clients at AHID actually hire us to do the construction work as well. We don't take on all the clients. There's a very specific sort of niche of clients that we like to take on. But basically, it makes my ability to control from the very beginning to the very end of a project much more seamlessly, right? So it's about controlling the customer experience, but it's also about controlling my reputation as a company and as a leader. It's about our ability to increase our revenue, our ability to develop really long-lasting relationships with people. So it is about kind of stacking on these other businesses that help to support you. So as an example, another layer of that is providing all of the furniture to a client. So you're creating this like collection of services. Another way you could look at integration too is, this happens all the time in construction companies. They might go out and acquire a millwork company, because one of the biggest costs on a construction site is millwork, right? So they're kind of like, I get to make my profit here, but I have another area where I can make a profit. And I think as we chat about this, which we probably will, is about how do you increase passive incomes for yourself? Because again, if you're only as good as however many hours you can work in a day, and the industry doesn't pay you for hours, it pays you for value, how do you create more value for your customers? So that's the sort of like high level, because I can definitely get into the weeds of explaining this, because there's vertical integration and horizontal integration and upstream and downstream. And really it's just about thinking about, as a business, what do you use that comes before you that would help your business, and what comes after you, right? That could help your business, or above or below, depending on how you want to look at it. So I always picture a river. It's like the water is either flowing upstream, downstream. It's like, where are you and what can you control? Does that, like that, hopefully that answers the question. I was like,
This is yeah, this is so great. And correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm making notes on this, and there's a lot of principles in this strategy that I think are so important for us to stick on and to really understand. Which I love, because what I'm picturing is this ecosystem that you're creating.
100%. It is a hub. It's an ecosystem. 100.
Yeah, and your ability to create an ecosystem which adds value to the market, right? And so one of the key things, and this is so key when we are creating our own income, right? So when we're moving from that whole, hey, I just get what I'm given, as in I'm an employee, so I sell my time and they give me the money. And women listening in, we're getting out of that trap. We're moving over this way and going, I'm not going to sell my time. I'm going to work out something I care about to sell, solve a problem in the market, add value, and get paid on that. So that's that first concept, which I think, and I remember you've probably read the book as well, Cash Flow Quadrant, Robert Kiyosaki.
I've read other books of it, but I haven't read that one. I'm going to type that right now.
That, because it'll fit so beautifully in with this vertically stacking as well, right? Because that's what I'm hearing, is that principle of the way in which we earn money. It's like, okay, you're not just selling the time, because we know that that's limited. We know we've got to get our thinking over here and solve the problems, add the value, get paid on that. And so what you have become really great at is problem solving, which is the number one skill in business, right? Identifying the problem and working out how to solve.
That's the job description for an entrepreneur. It's really like not much more special than that. You literally are just you're trying to solve a problem. You're either going into a market where other people are solving that problem and you've decided you can do it better and you can earn market share. Or as an example, when I developed Palette Archives, it was first to market. I think it's still the only thing like it on the market, where we're like, there's a gap here. There's a gap between what Amanda Hamilton Interior Design can provide and people doing it themselves. And so we created Palette Archives that sits in the middle, right? And so it's 100% you're solving problems. And having some synergies. And to be fair, I know lots of entrepreneurs who have everything from a consulting business to agriculture business, and they're all over. And I do think there's a world in which that works if you're able to remove yourself from those businesses almost entirely. Like, they've been set up, they have their own CEO and things like that. But yeah, if you are starting out, I mean, the first thing first is to get one business off the ground, and not just off the ground, but also go through a growth period. Make sure you have processes in place. Like, if anyone is listening to this right now, processes, right? Like, have those standards in place, because we went through a period where we grew huge. I didn't have processes in place and it was a nightmare, and we had to scale way back, set the processes in place, and restart again. And so I think, yeah, this ecosystem, it is really about trying to figure out how all these little nodules sort of work together in the same way that an ecosystem works, right? Like, animals and plants and water and everything, like, we all have to rely on each other to kind of keep this thing churning along. So 100%, like, it's better if there's some alignment between those things and that it's done very strategically.
Yeah, I love that advice. So really, it's get the first thing done first. What is that? The first offer, the first thing that you're commercializing, that business that you're starting. So that, and then look for sideline and things problems that you can solve on the back, like revenue engines that you can add in, which you're more monetizing an asset that you've already created, because you've got the skill by that time, right? You've got the skill, you've got certain assets.
Like, I think of so many examples when we're talking about this. Yeah, like, I have a friend. Yeah, for sure. So I have a friend, she's an artist, perfect example. She's an artist. She has to sit and paint every single painting. So it's an hourly gig, right? So one of the things that she did is she took her art and she translated that into really beautiful handmade rugs. And those sell for much more, and they sell over and over and over again. She also has done series of posters, though she does that limited because she doesn't want to devalue her original art. And then she also recently came out with an oracle deck. So it's sort of like you pull cards, and she wrote everything, and it's all of her art. Her name is Zoe Pollock. She's in Vancouver. So that's an example of somebody who goes, okay, I have this portion of my business, but like again, I'm only as good as my hours. So how do I take something I'm already good at and commercialize that? I know another woman who she calls herself a recovering lawyer, but while she was a lawyer, she also was really passionate about governance, so boards and things like that. And so she created a whole course and everything. So you create the course once and then you sell it over and over and over again, right? So there's so many examples of, I think, these different avenues where people start with one product or one service and then they go, yeah, how do I monetize this? And I think the bigger picture of the ecosystem that I wanted to mention before I forget is, I think people start businesses and they don't think about a succession plan and where this thing goes when they want to stop. So you are going to have better luck selling your business if you've created a package of services or an ecosystem. I'm in an industry that I know doesn't sell for very high multiples. You're buying like goodwill, basically. Like, you're buying somebody's portfolio or their reputation. So the question is how does that work when that person isn't there anymore? And so I think that's the other thing people need to think about with their ecosystem is like, what is the 20, 30-year plan? And you don't need to have an answer, but you should be thinking about what you're building and what the end goal is, because there's a part of me that's like, it's sad when a business that's been successful just ends, it just dies, and the world no longer gets access to those things.
That is so cool. It's so important to think about that. I love that perspective. Just like take it 20, 30 years, that end in mind. I think you're right because we can get so caught up in just the now.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it is hard thinking about that when you're going, I'm just getting this thing started. But at some point, to be able to, take it 10, 20 years down the road.
So I think, again, going back to this like glamorization of entrepreneurship and this obsession with growth, I also think it's totally okay if somebody, I mean, if you want to call it a solopreneur and it's you and you're doing your business and that's what makes you happy, no issues. If you want to have a lifestyle business that's just really great for cash flow, that you're like, this is going to be great until I have kids, or this is going to be great until my partner retires, or this is going to be great until I've earned this amount of money. That's okay too. Like I want to make sure that when people are listening to this, it isn't like, oh, it has to be like, I got to sell my company or go public or something like that. If you have aspirations for that, great. But there's also absolutely nothing wrong with being comfortable with being like, this is what I want to do. Maybe I never want to have more than 5 employees. That's comfortable. People should
100%.
feel bad about that.
It's the beauty of business, right? Is
Yeah.
that it's the vehicle, you're driving it. You get to choose what vehicle you're driving and where you're driving it to and when you're going to pull it over. Like we get to decide that, but I think often you can get in the trap where, as they say, it's like the business owns you and you just traded one job for another one, but you just own the job, and that's not the road we want to go down. Like we want to make sure that we're intentionally choosing, we're intentionally deciding the life that we want to build, and a business is just a vehicle to help us get there.
Yeah.
So, deciding what makes us happy and how we want to contribute and the problems that we want to solve. And it doesn't mean, I know we spoke about this earlier, like the passion side. I think because it's such a buzzword in this space, it's lost its edge. And some ways that I see people speak about passion, I think can be unhelpful, because you're not going to turn every passion you have into a paycheck, because often it's not viable. You mentioned it
You
before.
might like playing the guitar, but to be honest, your voice might suck and no one wants to listen to you. But you know what? You can do that at home, okay? You can play guitar all you want, but like maybe being a musician isn't your your forte.
Isn't your thing. Maybe, go do the other business which pays for your guitar lessons because you need them. Like
100%.
it flips the other way, and it's kind of just having this dance with it to understand those elements that I think you've beautifully figured out. So congratulations on that. And like you said, whether it was accidental, but now you get the learning because you did the thing, is going, hey, I get how I can take this creativity, take what I'm passionate about and solve a problem. It's a viable business. It's something that someone else needs, because that's a big learning as well, right? Is that I think often, for those listening in, sometimes we're like, I want to start the business because I need the cash flow. I need to get out of my job. I need this. I need that. And yes, the desire to do it starts there, but to be successful in any business, it can't be about us. It has to be about the need of the person that we're solving the problem
Your
for.
client has to be like the hero in the story, basically. I think it's Donald Miller who does a lot of books on this in terms of brands and stories and things like that. And that was the biggest thing that stuck with me. But I've also seen myself go through it. There has to be, there always is a certain amount of ego in somebody who's going to go out and be an entrepreneur, because you have to be confident enough to be like, yeah, I can do this better and I'm going to do it well. So like there needs to be a certain factor there. But ultimately, yeah, making your client the sort of hero of the story and focusing on, what I said is, it's like, well, the market will dictate your value. So chasing the money to get there, that's the part that I always laugh, because I think everybody thinks like, well, if you're an entrepreneur, you're just like a billionaire, like including my own grandmother, who's always like, you must be a millionaire. And I'm like, oh, if you only knew the trials and tribulations. And I wish I knew the source, but I remember reading a fact once, and maybe it was Harvard Business Review. I'd have to go back and find it, but it was like the average entrepreneur would make more money if they just went into a field of their expertise and worked for somebody else, which is hilarious, right? So that's why I was like, yes, you want to go into this so you can. For me, it was about controlling my income, like having some ability to control my earnings, but you have to go into it knowing that like it might be a slog for a while, and it might not be all of the things that you expected, but you're doing it because you're really passionate about it. And then through that passion, you're able to, you know, kind of, figure out how to be profitable at it as well. Because I mean, at the end of the day, you don't want to be doing something you love, but then hating it because you can't pay your bills.
Yeah, it's such great advice. I think it's just knowing that the payoff is worth it, right? Because
Totally.
whichever way we're going, there's hard in the path, there's easy in the path, there's good in the path, there's bad in the path. Like it's,
And it goes back and forth regularly. Like I think that's the other thing. You don't just like make it and then everything is like, you know, everything's perfect. You have, there's ebbs and flows in business, and you have to be always willing to sort of figure out how to push past them.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Such great advice, Amanda. I've loved this chat. So thankful to be able to have it with you. And I know those listening in are just going to be taking so many nuggets and likely listening to it again and again. What's next for you? Anything that you'd love to share, that's projects that you've got going on, or things that you would love our women to go and connect with to be able to follow you and keep up to date?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, in terms of what's next, I am working on a new business right now. And here's a perfect example. It was supposed to launch in fall. It's January 2025 right now. And so again, our studio has been very full. My schedule has been very demanding. And so sometimes you have to go, okay, something's got to go on the back burner for now, and you have to make hard decisions. That business is called Cool Auntie, and it's really a passion project for me. It's an e-commerce site. And ultimately I grew up with a family who loved to gift. So my grandma loves to gift, and everyone in my family, like it's just been a gifting thing, gifting family. And so I think that's become one of my love languages because of it. I love to gift. And people tell me all the time, they're like, you're so great at giving gifts. Like they're so curated, they're so thoughtful. You find these really interesting things. Like, how do you do it? But what I recognize is like, well, I'm not going to make money by being a personal shopper and being able to do all of this for people, right? Like, yeah, you can, but like, who's going to pay a premium for that? That's a really small niche market. And again, I'm only as good as my hours. And so I go, well, how do I do something that's more sustainable and can reach more people in an affordable way? So ultimately, Cool Auntie is this notion about being the cool auntie. I don't have kids of my own yet. And my friends are always like, you buy my kids the coolest things. Like you make it like look like my gift isn't anything. And so that's kind of where I've got my best friend's daughters call me the cool auntie. So it's a gifting website. So it's like a retail website, but it's also where you're going to get some curated gifts. And so the idea is like to really just bring the joy back into gifting. And I'm just over the gift card thing. It's like we can do better than that. We can do curated gifts. So that's kind of what's next. And then in terms of yeah, people can reach out to me on Instagram. My personal's at Amanda M. Hamilton. And our studio is where most of the action is happening, is at A Hit Studio on Instagram. And of course, yeah, feel free to send me an email or reach out, or like, you want to read my book, you can buy that on Amazon. There's no stories about entrepreneurship there, but like that's part one. And then the next book will be more about it. But there might be some stories in there. I think the biggest feedback that I got is that women were like, I really align with you. I went through those things myself, to the point where somebody actually took a star off of their review because they're like, it was so eerily similar that it creeped me out. And I was like, okay, I'll take that.
Wow. That is
Yeah.
amazing. Wow. Do you know what? I love that you shared what's next then, because you actually just wrapped up all the skills that we spoke about identifying something else. And you just have this awareness. and this openness to be like, oh, yep, that is what I'm great at. Yep, I can do that. Great, I'm going to go start something else. There's just so much to learn from what you're sharing. I love it. Hey, thank you so much. It's been great chatting with you. Thank you for your time.
Thank
And
you.
yeah, to see what you roll out next.
I'm looking forward to it, and maybe we'll have to do a part two.
Yeah, I think so.
Thanks for having me on.
Thank you, Amanda. Talk soon.
Bye.